Identity is such an interesting thing. I mean, Urmi is Bengali Italian living in Canada. That's how she says it. And what I found interesting talking with her was how she's so clear that her roots are just going to be the one she's going to hold on to. I mean, she's in Canada. It's a second home to her, but she shows up every single time as a Bengali Italian. And I did ask her, I'm like, you feel you're betraying your identity, but don't you think you're also betraying your Canadian identity because you've lived here for like 14 years? Let's get to it, and you probably hear answer on there. I find it really interesting, So you say you're Bengali Italian, so Italian by birth, Bengali by blood. And now you've moved to Canada. So, are you Canadian Bengali Italian, or would you still say you're Bengali Italian living in Canada? Like, who's Urmi? Just curious.
So technically, the correct way right now would be Italian by birth, Bengali by blood, and Canadian by law, because I am a Canadian citizenship. However, I always tell people that I am an Italian Bengali living in Canada, and I'm not able to add the Canadian yet to Italian Bengali because I don't fully feel I'm Canadian. I'm not able to associate myself as a Canadian person. Don't ask me why, but it's just I'm not feeling it.
I want to ask why.
No, I don't know. I don't know. I just don't feel it. I feel like I'm lying to myself if I add Canadian. I feel like I'm betraying my origins if I put Canadian because I only became Canadian later on in my life, but that's because it's by law that I became Canadian, not because by choice,
That's an interesting way to frame it. And I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing that with me, honestly. I appreciate that. And I understand, but again, it's a choice you made, right? Like you decided to move to Canada, you unlike the other one, you didn't choose any of them. Like you were born in Italy, your parents were Bengali. That wasn't your choice. This Canada was a choice. So I would think that the choice would be much easier. I understand, but I would think that the choice would be much easier to kind of associate with in some way, not fully, because I don't think you can ever fully let go of how you are raised and the country you are born in.
Yeah, and you know what? You're totally right, because I chose to move to Canada, but yet somehow inside of me, my heart, I don't feel I am Canadian. I do feel like Canada is my home, like my second home. It's but it's not like how I feel about my roots. It's not the same. It's really not.
But then now staying on this, so some people say this thing where, and I feel it too, which is why I find what you're saying really interesting. You're never really fully Italian, Bengali Italian again, and you're never really fully Canadian. Do you think that's what's happening to you, where you're just somewhere in between, and you love your roots because it's your roots, that's what you've been with for most of your life, but then you're living in Canada now, so do you feel like you're in between, or are you saying that no, I fully think that I'm Bengali Italian and Canada is where I live by law, that sort of thing?
Yeah, Canada is the place where I live, and I'm not in between anything, and I fully feel I am Italian Bengali, fully.
Okay, now still staying on your identity. Sorry, I'm digging into this a lot, but so now you've lived here for 14 years. Now you've lived in Canada for 14 years. Who do you think shows up in Canada? Do you think is the Bengali side of you or the Italian side of you? Because one thing I do know is that seeing your parents are Bengali, it means that you would have a lot of the Bengali traditions and stuff. I mean, you're raised in Italian culture, but you have a lot of you're a Bengali living in Italy, that sort of thing. So who shows up in Canada? The Bengali side or the Italian side, or a mix of both?
It's a mix of both because I want to show those two parts. Like given at home, for instance, I cook both cuisine. Like I don't just strictly
Nice.
stick to Bengali or Italian. I do a little bit of both. When it comes to languages, I speak both at the same time, not at the same time, but I speak both of them. And even in my, like, when it comes to like clothing, like I chose what to wear. Like I wear traditional outfits, Bengali outfits, but I also wear like Western clothes. So it's a choice. Like I chose to represent those two cultures because they represent me. So I show up like with the both. Like I show up myself with both cultures basically.
I like this actually. I mean, honestly, because it's a deliberate choice you're making. You're saying to
Yeah.
yourself that, yes, I live here now. This is home for me right now, but home inside my head is my roots. And I want to fully make sure that I keep that front and center when I show up in my new world.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so you'll know this is who I am, but I'm in this space with you at this point in time, which is a pretty good way to think about it, too, to be honest.
Yeah, because I also feel like if I'm not making this conscious decision and not conscious, like this conscious decision or choice, like I feel like I'm betraying myself and I'm betraying my identity. Like if I only chose to be Bengali, then I'm like literally betraying who I am. Like I'm not being honest to myself because I'm
Mm-hmm.
only choosing to show up just as a Bengali person. But I do want people to know that there is much more than that. There is a dual culture in me, and I want to show that to people.
But don't you think you're betraying your Kenyan identity, too?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so at all. Not because I still tell people that Canada is a good place to live. Like I always say, it's my second home. But of course, my first home is Italy. Like that's no doubt.
Like, I find that amazing because because I feel like you're being influenced by three cultures. So I find it amazing that you just picked two, and you're like, okay, these two are going to be who I am, like this is who I am.
Mm-hmm.
When you moved to Canada, like, was it easy? Was it hard? What do you think was going to be like for you? Or was it like, this is the best place? Like, this is amazing for me.
You know what? When I decided to move to Canada, I had no clue what I was going to face. I had zero clue. I was just like, when they say like life is like a box of chocolate, you never know what will show up. That's exactly how I approached that. Like I was like, you know what? Let's just see what's gonna come with it. So I had no clue what I was going to expect. I never done research about Canada. I only heard about the word in Canada when I was in Italy. And then I moved, but it was a pleasant surprise because as much as I don't want to associate myself as Canadian, I did feel like I've met people that were much more like me with dual ethnicity. So I felt like I was being understood because there were a lot of third culture kids. There were people speaking more than one languages. And so that's where I felt like I can be myself. I can call Canada my second home. In a sense, it helped me to find my identity. And then of course, like life in Canada is very different from life in Italy. Like I can see how Canada is very much based on work compared to Italy. Italy is a little bit laid back. I can see how it's very multicultural, like it's super multicultural. Like I have friends from different parts of the world, whereas in Italy, I only had friends from Italy, like strictly Italian. Whereas now I have people from all over the world. So in a sense, I feel like it was beautiful. It was a learning opportunity for me because I got to learn from people from different countries, different cultures, which was something that I was not exposed to. And so in a sense, it also made me a very open-minded person, very welcoming. And that's what I appreciate a lot about Canada.
Yeah. That like that thing you say about Canada, it's a super strength. You know, where you come here and you meet a lot of people who get you.
Yeah.
Like there's still the struggle, but they just get you because they themselves have been in one way or the other, either they know someone who was like you or they're somehow like you. They're trying to settle in, they're trying to understand the new country, they're just trying to find themselves. You know, when you moved, so in Italy, this is I'm asking this very dumb question. Like in Italy, you all speak Italian, do you speak English there?
No.
So when you
No,
moved, did you have to you learned English in Canada or you learned it to move to Canada? Like
no,
how
no,
did you?
no. I learned English in Italy actually, but we don't
Oh,
speak English in Italy. Like I learned it because it was part of the school curriculum. So
uh,
when I moved to Canada, I found myself speaking none of my mother tongues.
uh,
Yeah.
and there's this thing people say about immigrants, like so when you learn English in
Italy.
for
Hmm.
school or the
Hmm.
exam, it's very different from when you now move to where you need to speak it. You start to find out that what you learned in school is a bit very different from what is expected in the everyday interaction with people. Did you find that, or was it for you just like,
So here's the thing. When I learned English at school, I had a very tough teacher. So the way we learned English, we were good for life. Like we could go anywhere, we could work
oh,
in English,
nice?
we could study in English. So when I moved to Canada, I actually studied in university in English. I started to work in English as well. So I was not using like neither Italian nor Bengali to work or to communicate or anything. However, the difficult part was with the French because I also learned how to speak French when I was in Italy. But then when I moved to Canada, what happened is the French spoken in Montreal is Quebecois. And so that where I found the difficulty because I would tell people, yeah, I can speak French, I can speak French. But then when I started speaking, it was not true. I could not, I had a little bit of difficulty. But now here's the plot twist. Now what happened is I decided to work on it. I was very determined enough that I wanted to make sure that I was not losing my French, and so I actually started to speak in French with my friends, and now I work in a French environment. So I am again using I'm communicating in another language which is not my mother tongue. So I use French at work right now, and I also use English as well for other stuff.
So you speak 4 languages.
Yeah.
Beautiful. You know, that's a superpower of immigrants. Like it's that you're kind of forced to you just by chance or by birth or by stuff. You just find
Yeah.
out you speak multiple languages. I like for most Nigerians, we learn French while we are in primary school and secondary
Right.
school. And then you can speak basic French if you want to. And then you speak your native tongue and you speak
Mm-hmm.
English too. Some of us can speak two of the tongues in the country because I have friends who speak Igbo, Yoruba,
Right.
English, French, that sort of thing. Um, Now, seeing you've moved, you spent 14 years here, like, and you lived in Italy for a bit. How often do you go back home? Oh yeah, how often do you go back to Italy?
So here's the thing. I went back to Italy a couple of times. Because when my parents were living in Italy, I would go back to Milan pretty often. And then after they moved to UK. I would still go back to Italy, but I would not go back to the city where I was living. I would just visit other parts of Italy. However, this year, 2 months ago, I went back to Italy and I actually went back to my city, to the city where I was living. So it was like a jump in the past in a sense, because I went back to the where I was living. I went back to see my high school friends. So for me, like I always have that eager to go back. Like I miss it. I feel very nostalgic when I am in Canada and I think about my life in Italy. Yeah.
And every single time you go back, just curious, like, do you think that you're the same person? Like, do you just seamlessly slip back into the Italian culture, or do you find yourself sometimes doing stuff that are very Canadian that your friends go like, "Oh yeah, Urmi, that's not how we do things here." Maybe not exactly, they don't say it out, but does that happen to you, or you just slip back in seamlessly?
So here's what happened. When I went the previous to this year, when I went back to Italy, I went to other parts of Italy. Like I went to Rome, Florence. I was living the life of a tourist. But when I went back this time, I went back more like a citizen of Italy. And it hit me for some things because there are some things that I would remember when I was living in Italy, but I did not pay attention. Like it's something I completely forgot since I'm not living there. So I'm going to give you a good example. So, you know, when you get out of the airplane, you have to go and get the luggage, and then you get the trolley. And usually what happens is you just take the trolley. You don't have to put any coins, and you put your luggages on. But in Italy, which is something that I forgot, is that you have to put €1 inside, and then you get the trolley. And so that hit me because I was like, oh shit, that's what they do here. And so I got out of the airport, and I'm complaining to my friend, and I'm like, you see, I forgot about this little detail. So that was the first thing. The other thing was again at the airport. So in every single airport in the world, you have a fountain so you can get the water. For some reason, in the Malpensa airport, which is in Milan, they don't have that. So I was talking to the lady, and I was like, I need to get water, but I don't want to buy it. I said, where is the water fountain? She's like, oh, we don't have it here in Malpensa. And I'm like, have we not evolved in here? And so that was another thing. And then what happened is, okay, so here's the thing. Us Italians were known to complain a lot. And I went back to complaining. So all I was doing this whole time was complaining. And even now I'm complaining, which is a trait, like an Italian trait, that Italian people complain a lot. So I'm able to like go back to how I was, but I'm able to notice the differences now because I live in Canada. So I notice things that like are so common to me right now because I live in Canada, that when I go back to it, I notice that like Italy has not evolved in some aspect, in some things.
I find that thing you said about Italians complaining a lot pretty interesting. Like I always learn something new about cultures. Staying on this cultural shock thing. So now let's talk about the cultural shocks you experienced when you moved to Canada. I know you'd mentioned it a bit, but just when you moved as an Italian to Canada, like what were the biggest things that stood out to you, like from a cultural point of view or cultural codex that you're like, okay, this is a lot.
So here's the first one, because I'm a big coffee drinker. And in Canada, the coffee that it's drunk is the one, like it's the Americano, which is, it's a normal coffee, the filter coffee. In Italy, such thing does not exist. You like if you ask for coffee, they give you a shot of espresso. In here, if you ask for coffee, they give you the actual coffee, like it's in a coffee mug. So that for me was the biggest shock ever, because I was like, this is dirty water. I used to tell people this is dirty water. It felt like that. So that was the biggest shock. Then to buy a cappuccino, it was so expensive. Like it still is. Like it was a minimum like $4 or $5. And in Italy, you get a cappuccino for €1.50 or maybe €1.20. In Montreal or Canada in general, it's so expensive. So I would always like, that was like, okay, I have to stop drinking coffee because it's like I can't afford this to do this on a regular basis. So that was one of the things that that really shook me. The weather, for sure, the
Yeah.
weather, like the freezing rain was something that I never experienced my whole life, and I felt like I felt twice in the freezing rain. Like
Oh, sorry.
I don't wish it to anyone. So that was another shock as well. The other thing was the other funny shock was so you know when you take the bus in like anywhere in Canada, like everyone is on a like gets on a line, like it's whoever comes first goes in first. In Italy, it doesn't work like that. We're just pushing each other to go inside. We're pushing each other to get outside, and so that was another thing. And then another thing also is that people in Canada are very friendly, very kind, very gentle. And that's, I think, one of the most beautiful traits about Canadian people. Because in Italy, I'm not saying that people in Italy are not nice, but it's not like that. Like, people are not extremely kind and gentle with you. Like, people are nice, but that's like because we're civil. But we don't go like
Out of the way to
yeah,
help you.
exactly.
You know, I'm going back to something we were talking about earlier, which is basically, just listen to you talk and, the identity you've picked. Like, but are there aspects of the Canadian culture that you've embraced, and are they the ones that you find challenging? Because, I mean, I think like you're right. You're Italian-Bengali, you're Bengali-Italian living in Canada. So like, what have you taken? Do you think there's a part of the culture that is you've accepted fully, and the other parts you're like, nah, I struggle with this.
For the Canadian culture, you mean?
Yes,
Or
yes, the Canadian culture, actually.
It's a good question. I don't know if there is anything that I struggle with it a lot, because even when you talk about Canadian culture, I think it's like, what is it, the Canadian culture? Like, let's be honest. What is it?
Very good. Very,
What
very,
is
very.
it?
That's a good frame. Yeah, that's a really good frame.
What is it? So that's the thing. Like, I don't think Canadian culture, like, do we associate it to a specific group of people, or do we associate it to Canada as a multicultural country where everyone can integrate themselves? Because in that sense, then it's easy. It's easy to basically integrate. You're not struggling with anything because you can be yourself. So here's what we have to think about it. Like, what do we mean by Canadian culture? Because it could mean many things. And I don't think, I think the beauty of the Canadian culture is that it's so welcoming and opening that anyone from any kind of ethnicity can be whoever they want to be.
Yeah, yeah, that's so true. Like, because really, what is the Canadian culture? Like, I mean, there's all the things like people would say. There's the things like, oh, we are nice, we are
Right.
kind.
Right.
There's we won't complain about stuff. We will not tell you directly what we want to say. We will dance around the bush and tell you indirectly what we want to say. I think maybe that's the one that's probably Canadian. But again, you're right when you ask the question. But how many people are actually like that? Because when you have a multicultural society, they are Nigerian. Nigerians behave a lot like Americans. So when we don't exactly pick that trait, and I assume that's the same across with other cultures that come into the country and live here, they pick bits and pieces of the Canadian culture and mix that with theirs and then
Right.
operate from there, So you're right. Like, that's a really good point. Like, what is the Canadian culture, or what is the culture of Canada is going to become in the future?
Exactly. And it's the same thing when you think about, like, who are Canadian people? Like, what do you think of? Like, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Like, I think about people with different cultures, different ethnicity. That's what comes to mind. There is not like a specific group that comes to my mind. Like, I think about people from Africa. I think about people from South America. I think about people from Asia. Like, that's what I think of. So it's a mix of cultures at the end. I
Yes.
think Canadian people, Canadian culture, anything about Canada.
Yeah. It's so I don't know what the word is, like, because I guess that's the benefit of being multicultural. But then the I don't say a problem, but then the thing that you have to work out as a multicultural society is then what is your culture, and how do you make sure that culture becomes the de facto cultural codec? Because every single person that comes in here picks their own understanding of the culture based off where they're coming from.
Yes, but here also the other thing is that, like, I don't think in Canada there is a like a group of ethnicity that is most prevalent. Like in other countries, like if we think about Italy, for instance, you mainly see the biggest population being Italians, and then you have a small portion of immigrants. But Canada is the land of immigrants. And the other thing is that yes, you pick up a little bit of the Canadian culture, but you also have a little bit of your own cultures because there are communities here.
Yes.
Like you have, I don't know, Little China, you have Chinatown, you have Little Italy, you have, I don't know, you have a little bit of everything. So you are taking a little bit of everything and creating your own thing, which is not a bad thing, I would say. It's like a fusion.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fusion. It's nice.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is nice. It is nice. It's just something to think about, from a cultural homogeneity. There's all these things they talk about, like what is really what? Like what does exist? Like how does the country create an identity for itself? Like, or this is what Canada means. This is who Canada is when it comes on the global stage. Because every single other culture seems to have an identity they can stand behind. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's just something to think about.
Right. But you know what? Like I've been to other countries, like I've been also to UK, which is where my parents live. And I feel like in UK, it has such a big population of South Asian people to the point that I feel like when you think about British people, like I feel like to me, what comes to my mind is South Asian people because the community is just way too big. So in a sense, that's like Great Britain is like losing its identity, I feel like, because there's just one big culture that is like part of it. It's like they're taking control over everything. It's like, it's not good. I think it's not good. Whereas in Canada, you have a bit of everything. You have literally a little bit of everything. In some other countries, you don't. You have one thing, or you have one culture that is taking over everything.
Yeah. I mean, I've not been to the UK that much. I've been there once, so I can't speak much about the place. I have family there. I'm probably going back there over the holidays. But I hear you about that thing about like the beauty of Canada is just everything. You can meet anyone. You can eat every single kind of meal you want, and it will taste exactly like it would taste if you went to the home country because
Literally.
because everyone is making it from their home.
Yeah.
So I think the last question I have for you is, if you think about, your journey, where you are right now, all the things you're doing and how you see the world, do you think that, especially considering the fact that it feels like Canada is here, just who you are, do you think at some point you're not going to say, you know what, I'm going to immigrate, I'm going to move back to Italy? Do you think that would happen to you at some point?
You know what? It does cross my mind even now. It does cross my mind. I'll probably would when I retire. I think to live in Italy, like in your 20s, in your 30s, even in your 40s, I don't know if it's a good idea because life there can be difficult. Like the economic situation is not the best, so it can be difficult. So I would say like when I think about my life back to it, I think about it when I would retire. Like I want to live stress-free life. So I do think back about, like, I think about in that sense. And I also think about like whenever I die, I want to be buried in Italy. Yeah, I want to be buried in Italy. That's it. And I have a plate of pasta next to my, I don't know how, my tomb. I don't know how it's called in English now.
Fair enough. Honestly, fair enough. Well, thank you so much. Thank you. This has been really, really, really interesting. I mean, I really find it interesting how you see identity and stuff. And the truth is that it kind of shows in your work that you share with the world. It shows in your work. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now that was interesting. Identity is such a few thing, and I feel like we all, as an immigrant, I think you can make a deliberate choice to decide what you want to focus on or what you want to be your identity. And Urmi seems to have that nailed down. As always, thank you so much for listening to this. If you know someone who finds it interesting, please share with them. If you know someone you think I should talk to, please send them our way. And with that, peace out.